The village settled into its usual evening hush, each household tucked behind low stone walls and arching vine trellises. A gentle stillness flowed through the air, broken only by the far-off call of a nightjar or the soft bray of a donkey somewhere, near the stables. Inside their modest home, Septimus carefully placed another log onto the fading hearth fire. The orange glow painted gentle shadows across the stone floor, while Livia laid a light woolen blanket across Alia's legs as she dozed on the sleeping bench beside the window. Livia picked up her spindle and flax bundle again, continuing to twist the threads with slow, circular motions, the fibers passing through her fingers in a quiet rhythm. Spinning wool was one of those tasks that carried not only the needs of the home, but the memory of her mother and grandmother before her. Each length of thread was like a line in the poem of her life. Sturdy, warm, simple. The gentle creak of the spindle and the crackle of the fire filled the room with a kind of lullaby for grown hearts. Outside the open window, a cool breeze stirred the scent of ripe figs and lavender. The olive grove beyond the garden swayed gently in the dark, the trees tall and silent like kindly watchmen. Somewhere near the well, an old man hummed a lullaby to his goats, a song passed down from a time before the roads were paved with stone, when the stars were counted aloud like grains of barley. Septimus lowered himself beside his wife and watched her work for a moment, his large hands resting on his knees. "You always make it look like the thread is dancing," he murmured. Livia smiled without looking up. "Only because the thread knows the way," she replied softly. They spoke like this sometimes, in phrases and thoughts that floated gently between them like drifting leaves on a slow river. There was no need to explain too much. The years had shaped them, not unlike the pottery in Varro's shed or the paths carved between their fields. Everything had its place, and each day folded peacefully into the next like cloth over a sleeping child. Alia stirred slightly and blinked awake, the firelight dancing in her soft eyes. "Mama," she whispered, "can we go to the vineyard tomorrow?" Livia brushed a curl from her daughter's cheek and nodded. "We'll go after the bread is made." Alia gave a drowsy smile and curled back into the woolen shawl, comforted not just by the answer, but by the certainty of it. In this village, the tomorrows were never loud or sudden. They arrived quietly, wrapped in the scent of rising dough and carried by the footsteps of neighbors. That night, sleep crept into every corner of their home like gentle mist. The fire sank low into glowing embers, and the stars held their place above the roof tiles. The rhythms of village life, like the beating of a steady heart, continued even as dreams took root in the minds of those resting beneath the thatched ceilings. The fields would wait until dawn, the olive trees standing as sentinels in the dark, while the family dreamed of fig harvests, cool riverbanks, and sunlit market days. Morning returned slowly, as it always did, with birds chirping along the garden wall and the pale light of the sun filtering through linen curtains. Livia was the first to rise, moving quietly so as not to disturb the others. She stepped out into the courtyard where the air was fresh and still damp with dew. She bent near the herb garden, brushing her fingers over the mint and chamomile, drawing in the soft fragrance with a smile. Inside, she began preparing bread, mixing the flour with water, a pinch of salt, and a drizzle of olive oil, her hands moving in the same motions her mother had taught her. The dough took shape slowly, gently kneaded and folded, then left to rest near the warm stones of the hearth. Septimus rose soon after and went to the tool shed to prepare his scythe. Today, he would check the lower wheat fields and clear the irrigation channels that had collected leaves during the recent winds. Alia was slower to wake. She sat up blinking, then leaned out the window to greet the morning sun, waving at a neighbor's cat as it trotted across the low wall. She dressed in her simple tunic and helped her mother sprinkle flour onto the board. Livia gave her a small piece of dough to shape into her own tiny loaf, which she did with great care, pinching the sides and decorating it with a single bay, leaf pressed into the top. As the bread baked, the home filled with a comforting scent. The table was set with clay bowls, a wedge of soft cheese, and a few fresh plums from the tree near the garden gate. They ate together again as they always did, slowly, gratefully, before setting off for the vineyard. The path to the vineyard wound gently through olive groves and beside a small brook, its banks lined with yellow wildflowers. Aelia skipped ahead, carrying a basket, while Livia and Septimus walked hand in hand, speaking softly about the state of the vines and what tasks awaited them. When they arrived, the vineyard shimmered with dew, the grape clusters heavy with promise. Livia began inspecting the lower rows, plucking away damaged leaves and checking for signs of mold. Septimus adjusted the trellises, tightening the cords and realigning the stakes. Aelia, meanwhile, gathered fallen grapes and built small towers of stones under the shade of a fig tree. The morning drifted by in peaceful rhythm. No rush, no noise, just the slow dance of hands and tools and wind. The sun warmed their shoulders, and birds sang overhead, darting between the vines and soaring against the bright sky. A short while later, they sat beneath the fig tree to share a bit of flatbread and cheese, sipping water from a shared clay jug, their words few and their smiles easy. As they rested, the breeze picked up again, carrying the scent of baked earth and distant rosemary. Livia leaned her head on Septimus's shoulder, and Aelia laid her basket beside her, content. These were the moments that made up a life, not grand or loud, but steady and whole, like the deep roots of the vineyard or the worn stones of their kitchen floor. Midday passed slowly. They continued their work with renewed care, knowing that the vines they tended would feed not only their family, but the community that wove its life around the rhythm of seasons. And as the afternoon stretched on, they returned home again, their hands dusty, their hearts light, and the sound of their footsteps lost beneath the hush of evening once more. As they passed the familiar olive trees on their return home, the sky turned a soft shade of amber. The sun, now descending behind the distant hills, bathed the land in gentle hues of gold and rose. Shadows lengthened across the stone pathway, dappling the worn ground with the silhouettes of leaves dancing. In the light breeze, birds called softly from the rooftops and hedgerows, their songs slower now, as if they too were preparing to rest. Septimus carried the empty water jug over his shoulder, while Aelia held her small basket close to her chest, its contents now filled with smooth river stones she had collected under the fig tree. Livia walked just behind them, one hand resting gently on her belly, a quiet habit she'd developed almost unconsciously, as if to remind herself of the warmth of the day and the peace she carried homeward. When they reached the village, the square was settling into its own kind of quiet rhythm. A few neighbors greeted them with nods and smiles. Old Gaius, seated on the edge of the fountain, was telling a soft story to two children perched at his feet. The sound of his voice, raspy but warm, floated through the evening air like a melody from an old lute, comforting and slow. It was a tale of the moon, of how she watches over the fields at night and protects the crops with her silvery gaze. Inside their home, the hearth still held the last faint glow from the morning's fire. Septimus knelt to stir it back to life, adding a few dry twigs and coaxing the warmth into flames once more. Aelia placed her stones carefully on the window ledge, arranging them in a line, each one touched by her tiny fingers, each one carrying a memory of a moment spent beneath the grapevines. Livia began preparing their evening meal. A lentil stew simmered in a clay pot over the fire, its scent rich with thyme and a hint of garlic. She added thin slices of carrot and turnip, stirring slowly as steam curled upward, carrying warmth through the room. On a wooden plate, she set out olives, a heel of dark bread, and a few figs sliced into quarters, their insides gleaming like small amber jewels. As they sat down to eat, the room filled with the kind of silence only found in places where love and contentment are known well. They didn't speak much, only a few murmured words of thanks, of small reflections on the day, of gentle observations. The spoon tapping the bowl, the soft hum of the fire, the quiet breeze outside, these sounds were all they needed. It was not the absence of talk, but the presence of peace. Later, after the meal was cleared and the hearth swept clean, Aelia sat at her mother's side with a small clay tablet. Livia traced letters for her, whispering the sounds as Aelia copied them carefully. The letters were simple. the name of their village, the word for olive, the word for sleep. Septimus watched them both with quiet pride before stepping outside, into the courtyard, where the night sky unfolded above him like a vast and gentle tapestry. The stars had begun to pierce the twilight one by one. He looked up, following their familiar patterns, the same constellations he had known since boyhood, the plow, the goatfish, the gentle arch of the celestial lion. They had been there, before his time and would remain long after, watching over the vineyards, the groves, and the little stone houses where people like him lived quiet, worthy lives. Livia joined him soon after, her shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Together they stood in the doorway, watching the stars blink into full brightness. The air smelled faintly of smoke and mint. In the distance, a flute played. Someone in the village, perhaps young Tullius, who liked to sit beneath the cypress tree near the well, was playing a tune that rose and fell like breath, a lullaby wrapped in wind. "I wonder," Livia said softly, "what dreams Aelia will have tonight." Septimus didn't answer right away. He stepped back inside and looked at their daughter, now curled up on the bench near the hearth, her fingers resting gently on the clay tablet. Her eyes closed. "Happy ones," he said after a moment. "She's growing with joy in her heart." Livia nodded and they both returned to the warmth of the room, pulling the door gently closed behind them. That night, as the village slumbered under the stars, the home was wrapped in a deep hush. Even the animals in the courtyard seemed to breathe more slowly. Dreams came easily in that kind of silence, not rushed or wild, but soft and clear, like ripples across a calm pond. Far off in the fields, the cicadas sang quietly, their rhythm slow and steady, like the beating of the earth's own heart. And above all of it, the moon rose higher, its pale light falling gently across rooftops, across gardens, across the weary shoulders of the olive trees. In this moment, in this quiet Roman village, there was no fear, no worry. Only the peace of lives lived gently, side by side, in harmony with the land. Of course, continuing the story softly and seamlessly. In the quiet hours before dawn, the village rested under a blanket of deep stillness. The narrow stone lanes lay empty, touched by moonlight, and the occasional whisper of the wind threading its way between the houses. Within their home, Septimus stirred just slightly in his sleep, one arm resting across Livia's waist. Aelia, wrapped snug in her woolen blanket, dreamed gently beneath the clay tablet she had insisted on keeping near her side. The warmth from the hearth had long faded into gentle embers, but the walls still held the memory of yesterday's fire. Outside, a rooster crowed softly, his call muffled by the early mist that clung to the rooftops and hedges. The sounds of daybreak were not abrupt here. They unfolded like petals opening to the sun, gradually, reverently, in no hurry at all. Livia woke first, as she often did. She lay still for a moment, listening. There was something deeply comforting in the rhythms of this quiet world. The faint crackling of cooling wood, the gentle breathing of her family, the distant rustle of branches beyond the shutters. She rose carefully, wrapping herself in her shawl and stepping barefoot across the stone floor. She lit a small oil lamp, its flame flickering softly in the dim light, then made her way to the kitchen corner where she began preparing the morning's grain. A clay pot of barley sat beside the water jar, and Livia measured it with practiced hands. The grains tumbled softly into the cooking pot, like sand across polished stone. She added water, then stirred slowly, watching as the mixture began to swell and thicken. As the scent of warm barley filled the room, Aelia stirred in her sleep, then blinked awake. Her hair was tousled, her cheeks pink from sleep. "Good morning, little bird," Livia said softly. Aelia yawned and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Is it time to walk to the well again?" she asked sleepily. "Soon," her mother replied with a gentle smile. "But first, let us eat and greet the day slowly." Septimus joined them shortly after, his eyes still heavy with sleep but his expression peaceful. He kissed Livia's cheek, then ruffled Aelia's hair as he sat down beside the hearth. As they ate their morning porridge, the family spoke in quiet tones, the way people do when the world around them is still asleep. They shared simple dreams, small plans for the day, and laughed softly at a story Alia told of a chicken she had dreamed had grown wings and flown to Rome. Once their bowls were cleaned and the morning warmed by the sun's soft descent, they stepped outside into the village. The dew still clung to the grasses, and a thin mist rose from the fields. The neighbors were beginning to appear. Marcia, the baker's wife, sweeping her doorway. Lucius, the cobbler, inspecting a pair of worn sandals with a thoughtful frown. Septimus offered a wave to each of them, and Alia skipped ahead, collecting dewdrops on her fingertips as she went. As they neared the well, the sun began to peak fully above the horizon, casting long rays of light across the village and giving everything a golden sheen. Alia stopped and pointed excitedly. "Look, Mama," she said. "The olive trees look like they're glowing," and they did. The moisture on the leaves caught the sun just right, making each olive branch shimmer softly in the morning air. Livia knelt beside her daughter and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The trees are waking up just like us." They filled their jugs slowly, then made their way back home by a different path, one that passed through a small grove of almond trees. The trees were in bloom, their pale blossoms drifting down like tiny feathers. Alia reached up to catch one and held it in her palm. "Do you think the blossoms fall because they're sleepy?" she asked. Livia smiled. "Maybe they've danced all night and now they're ready to rest." That day passed gently. Septimus worked in the garden behind the house, planting a new row of beans near the stone wall, where the sun lingered longest. Livia tended to the herbs, whispering to the basil and the thyme as she watered them, a quiet ritual passed down from her grandmother. Alia played near the old fig tree with her cloth doll, pretending the doll was a merchant from Alexandria, come to trade silks and honey for stories and figs. At midday they rested in the shade of the olive press, the air fragrant, with crushed leaves and distant rosemary. Septimus took a short nap, his wide-brimmed hat tilted over his face, while Livia read softly to Alia from a scroll borrowed from the village elder, a tale of a dolphin who guided lost sailors home. In the middle of the afternoon, Livia gently reminded Alia, "You know, little one, it helps us a lot when people enjoy our stories. If they like what we share about our village, our days, our peace, they might choose to listen again." Alia nodded solemnly, her eyes wide with understanding. "So maybe they'll share the stories too," she whispered, "and more people can dream with us." Livia kissed the top of her head. "Yes, my love, that's how stories grow, like olive trees, one branch at a time." By evening, the rhythm of the village slowed once again. The sun dipped low, and the shadows stretched across the vineyards. Livia and Septimus stood by the doorway, watching Alia chase fireflies beneath the grape arbor. She twirled, laughed, then stood still, her arms raised as if welcoming the night. Later, bathed and wrapped in soft linen, she nestled into her cot while her mother sang a lullaby in a voice barely above a whisper. The tune carried through the house, mingling with the scent of lavender and warm earth. The moon cast its light across the floor in a slow arc, and soon the family slept once more. Beyond the village, the land exhaled. The mountains, the fields, the trees, they all seemed to pause. There was no rush, only peace, only the steady rhythm of days lived with care, nights folded in quiet rest and dreams as smooth and endless as the sky itself. The next morning began with a hush even deeper than the one before. A soft mist lingered over the countryside, curling gently around the low stone fences and clinging to the edges of terracotta rooftops. Alia was the first to wake, blinking slowly in the half-light that filtered through the wooden shutters. She sat up without speaking, listening to the muffled world around her, the occasional drip of water from the eaves, the rustling of hens beginning to stir in their roosts, and the soft breathing of her parents nearby. She held that moment for a while, unmoving, as though savoring a dream that hadn't quite finished. Livia stirred soon after, smiling as she saw her daughter sitting so still. She reached over and smoothed Alia's hair, her fingers moving softly over the girl's curls. "A quiet morning," she whispered. Alia nodded, still not ready to speak. She only held up the little bundle of dried lavender she had kept beside her pillow. "I dreamt the fields were purple," she finally said. "They are, for a little while," Livia replied, glancing toward the window. "When the sun hits the hills just right." They moved about the house gently, mindful not to wake Septimus. Just yet. Livia prepared warm milk with a touch of honey, and Alia helped by placing fresh reeds in the little basket they used for straining. The movements were small, careful, filled with purpose but never hurried. It was in this rhythm that the family thrived, an unspoken agreement that each moment deserved space to unfold. When Septimus finally rose, he did so with a soft sigh and a stretch that made his shoulders crack. "That mist smells of spring," he murmured, taking a cup of the warm milk. "Maybe the first fig blossoms will open today." He was right. By midday, as the sun climbed steadily and the mist lifted from the hills, the fig tree beside their home had begun to bloom. Alia noticed it first, tugging on her father's sleeve and pointing excitedly to the soft white petals emerging like secrets from between the branches. Septimus crouched beside her and touched one gently with the back of his finger. "These will be sweet when the summer sun ripens them," he said. "I want to pick the first one," Alia whispered. "You may," he replied, smiling. "But only if you sing to it each morning." That became her new task, one she took on with the seriousness only a child can carry. Each morning she would sing to the fig tree in her quiet, sleepy voice. Some mornings, she made up songs about the wind or about bees and their golden feet. Other days, she hummed little tunes she'd heard from passing travelers or learned from Livia's lullabies. The tree stood there patiently, as trees do, drinking in her music. Their days unfolded with the steadiness of river water. Septimus continued tending to the kitchen garden, weaving baskets when the soil was too wet to work. Livia began dyeing fabric again, soaking wool in vats of soft blues and ochres, her hands stained but her heart content. Alia sometimes helped, her stir the pots, the heat rising in shimmering waves around them as the colors deepened. At night they would gather near the hearth, each of them with something simple in hand, a scroll to read, a bit of mending, or a piece of fruit to share. The fire would crackle softly, and the shadows would dance against the walls. These were the moments they all cherished most, not for their excitement, but for their gentleness, the kind of moments that seemed to hold the entire meaning of life. Within them, quiet, shared, lasting. Occasionally, a traveler would pass through the village. A tanner from the hills, a merchant from the coast. They brought with them stories, sometimes goods, sometimes letters from distant relatives, but always, they remarked on the village's stillness. "It feels like time slows here," one merchant said while sipping water from Livia's jug. "As if the gods themselves decided to rest for a while among your olive trees." Livia had smiled and replied, "Perhaps they did, or perhaps we just listen better." One such afternoon, the family sat beneath the arbor, the vine leaves casting mottled shade across the table. Alia nibbled on a honey cake, her feet swinging gently above the ground. Septimus was carving a handle for a new tool, and Livia was winding yarn. It was in that moment that Alia looked up and said, "Will the world always stay this soft?" Septimus paused his carving and looked to the hills, the sunlight reflecting in his eyes. "Not always," he said softly. "The world changes. The wind can rise, storms may come, but this," he gestured gently around them, "this is what we carry inside, this softness, this stillness, and if we remember it, we can return to it even when the world is loud." Livia nodded, her voice warm. "Like a lullaby you hum when you're frightened. Or a fig blossom," Alia added, "that sleeps in the tree until it's ready." That night the sky bloomed with stars. The Milky Way stretched above the village like a great river of light. They lay on woven mats outside their home, looking up in silence. Alia pointed to a cluster of stars. "That one looks like a sheep," she said. "Then we shall call it the Dreamer," said Livia, "because it's watching over the fields while we sleep." Septimus chuckled quietly. "The Dreamer it is." And as the stars wheeled above them and the cicadas sang their lullabies, the family drifted into sleep, wrapped in the comfort of their gentle life. The sun rose slowly over the distant cypress trees, casting golden streaks through the morning haze. In the village, where stone paths wound gently between terracotta homes, the peaceful rhythm of life carried on. Septimus awoke early, stirred by the distant bleating of a neighbor's goats and the cooing of doves that had made a home under their roof's eaves. He lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of the world beginning again, his breath even and slow as he watched the flicker of sunlight dance across the wooden beams above. Livia stirred beside him, her eyes opening gradually as if she too was trying to hold on to the last threads of sleep. She smiled gently as she turned toward him. "Another day," she whispered, her voice a breath in the calm. "Another day," he echoed. Alia was still curled beneath her blanket, hugging a little cloth doll Livia had made for her the winter before. Septimus rose carefully, pulling on his tunic without sound. He stepped outside and was met by the sweet scent of dew-wet earth and blossoming vines. The world was quiet, except for the occasional flutter of wings and the rustle of trees. In the breeze, he took it in slowly, drawing in long, steady breaths. As the village came to life, Livia lit a small flame beneath her clay pot and warmed some barley porridge. The scent mingled with the morning air, earthy and sweet. Alia sat up, rubbing her eyes, her curls sticking out in all directions. She smiled sleepily and shuffled over to sit beside her mother. They shared a quiet breakfast, words minimal and meaningful. After their meal, Septimus made his way toward the fields, his tools slung over one shoulder in a woven strap. Today he would tend to the bean rows that were beginning to sprout. He moved through the field with care, each footstep measured. He knelt to inspect the leaves, brushing aside the earth, ensuring each young plant had enough space and sun. As he worked, he hummed a soft tune, a melody passed down from his father, a song of spring and soil. Livia and Alia spent the morning gathering herbs along the edge of the orchard. Wild thyme, mint, and a few sprigs of chamomile, their baskets slowly filling with green. They worked together in quiet cooperation, Alia reaching for the low-hanging clusters while Livia reached higher, her fingertips brushing against the bees that flitted from blossom to blossom. They returned home slowly, the sun warming their backs, the scent of fresh herbs lingering on their fingers. Back at the villa, the courtyard was still shaded. The vines overhead filtered the sunlight, dappling the stone floor in patterns that moved gently with the wind. Livia set out her herbs to dry on woven trays, while Alia settled near her father, now sitting beneath the arbor mending a wooden rake. "Tell me a story," Alia said, leaning her head against his arm. Septimus set down his tool and smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. "All right, little fig blossom. A story of the river and the stone." She nodded, already lost in the rhythm of his voice before he began. "There once was a river," he said, "that flowed through mountains and forests, always hurrying, always rushing. It passed everything quickly, villages, meadows, even people, waving from the banks. But one day it came upon a stone in its path, a large, unmoving stone." Alia's eyes followed a passing butterfly as she listened, her hand tracing shapes on the dusty ground. The river pushed against the stone, tried to move around it, but it couldn't, so it shouted and roared and rushed, but the stone didn't move. Days passed, then years, and slowly, as time trickled on, the river changed. It no longer shouted. It began to flow softly, gently, until the stone, worn by the kindness of water, began to smooth, to shine. And though the stone never moved, the river learned to love the stillness. Alia looked up at her father, thoughtful. "Was the stone lonely?" "No," Septimus said, brushing a bit of dirt from her cheek, "because the river never left. And in its gentle presence they both found peace." Livia had been listening, a faint smile on her lips. "That's a good story," she said. "It's a true one," Septimus replied softly. Later that afternoon, A neighbor stopped by with a basket of apples, their skins pale green and smooth to the touch. In return, Livia offered a jar of her plum preserves. They stood in the courtyard for a while, chatting about the weather, the bees, the state of the path leading into the hills. No one was in a hurry. Words moved like the breeze, soft, slow, without pressure. That evening after supper, Alia asked if they could walk to the ridge to see the stars. They agreed, gathering cloaks and a small flask of warm wine. The walk was not long, but they took it slowly, stopping to listen to the sounds of the woods, to the rustle of reeds by the stream, and to the chorus of crickets beginning their nighttime music. When they reached the ridge, the valley stretched out before them, bathed in silver. Moonlight, the stars above were brilliant and endless. Alia lay between her parents, her hands behind her head, gazing up in wonder. "There's the dreamer," she said, pointing toward the familiar shape. "And beside it, the watcher," Septimus added, "always guarding." Livia wrapped an arm around her daughter. "Sleep finds us easily out here," she whispered. "The stars remember every dream." They lay there long after the moon climbed high, letting the stillness of the night settle into their bones. The air was cool, the kind that reminded them of how small and safe one could feel beneath the vastness of sky. Midway through the night, as they rose to return home, Septimus paused and said quietly, "Let's never forget how this feels." "Won't," Alia said, squeezing his hand. They walked home in silence, wrapped in wool and warmth, guided by the soft light of the stars. Morning came gently once again, with the air cool and clean as it slipped between the olive trees, and across the rooftops of the village. The sun peeked shyly over the hills, casting a soft golden wash across the landscape. Alia stirred first, this time opening her eyes slowly to the quiet rustle of leaves and the low hum of distant voices beginning the day. She slipped out from beneath her blanket, tiptoeing toward the small hearth where her mother was already preparing the mornings. Livia stood in a calm rhythm, her hands moving with quiet precision as she ground lentils with a smooth stone. The scent of crushed herbs filled the air, lavender, a touch of rosemary, and fennel. She smiled at her daughter without words, handing her a fig to nibble as the porridge simmered. Alia sat near her, watching the steam curl into the cool morning. Light, her eyes still soft with sleep. Septimus soon joined them, stretching slowly before stepping outside to feel the earth beneath his feet. The early dew kissed the soles of his sandals, and he took a moment to breathe in the world. It was in these unspoken routines, shared glances, small smiles, the familiar sound of footsteps across stone, that their peace bloomed each day. The simple beauty of knowing what would come next, yet still finding joy in every step. After breakfast, they prepared for a visit to a nearby grove where a small group of villagers would be gathering. It was a custom during the late spring, an afternoon of storytelling and shared food beneath the broad arms of the old chestnut trees. Alia was especially excited, not only for the sweet cakes often brought by a woman named Camilla, but because she would get to hear stories from Elder Gaius, a man with a deep voice and eyes like dark polished stone, who told tales that made the sky feel wider and the past feel close. They walked slowly through the meadows, the three of them together, carrying a woven cloth with bread, olives, and soft cheese wrapped gently in its folds. The path was scattered with wildflowers, and bees buzzed lazily in the warm morning air. Alia bent to pick a daisy and then another, threading them into a chain as she walked. The grove welcomed them with shade and the soft rustle of branches overhead. Already, others had arrived, neighbors and friends, children tumbling in the grass, elders seated on smooth stones with cups of wine balanced in their palms. Septimus greeted them with the calm warmth he carried everywhere, and Livia's quiet laughter joined the melody of voices in the air. Alia sat cross-legged at the feet of Elder Gaius, her eyes wide, as he began one of his favorite stories, tale of a forgotten city buried beneath sand, its gates guarded by whispering winds, and a fountain at its center that sang only under the full moon. His voice moved like a slow river, measured and low, and the entire grove seemed to lean in with her, drawn together by the thread of imagination. As the story ended and the wind rustled through the trees as if in applause, Aelia sighed in contentment. Septimus and Livia looked on, their hands lightly clasped, their hearts steady. There was something eternal in these moments, something that felt as though it could stretch beyond seasons and years. They stayed in the grove well into the afternoon, talking softly with friends, sharing bites of fruit and soft honeyed pastries, the kind that melted on the tongue and left the warmth of sunshine behind. In the slow drift of time, the village seemed to breathe with them, not rushing toward anything, but simply existing in the quiet fullness of now. As the sun lowered and the shadows grew long, the family walked home again, their steps unhurried. Aelia was sleepy, her head resting against her mother's side, her daisy crown now slightly crooked. The path was bathed in golden light, and as they passed the quiet fields, Septimus spoke. When I was a boy, I thought I had to go far to find something special, but I've learned that what we need is usually right where we are. Livia nodded, brushing Aelia's hair from her face. Home carries the answers we grow into. At their villa, the evening unfolded with its familiar calm. The sky turned from rose to deep violet, and a soft breeze danced through the open windows. Livia lit a small oil lamp, casting a gentle glow across the room. Aelia was already asleep, curled in the crook of her blanket, her breathing deep and even. Septimus sat near the hearth, rubbing his hands together to work the day's dust from his skin. Livia joined him, and they sat together in silence, watching the lamp flame flicker. It was a quiet language they shared, one of presence and peace. No need to fill the space with words when the heart was already full. Before bed, Septimus stepped outside once more, drawn by the moonlight. He looked up at the sky, the same stars he had shown Aelia the night before, still bright above. He whispered a quiet thanks, not to anyone in particular, just a breath of gratitude into the night air. Back inside, as the lamp burned low, the villa sighed into sleep. The world outside settled into stillness, and within its walls, the gentle dreams of a peaceful family stirred softly like leaves in a spring wind. Midway through the night, Livia murmured in her sleep and reached for Septimus. He was already beside her, his hand slipping into hers without thought, a simple reminder that love, like the stars, was always there, even when eyes were closed. The morning light came slowly, spilling golden beams across the villa floor in warm, glowing slants. Birds called from the orchard, their songs gentle and measured, as if they too respected the unhurried rhythm of village life. Aelia awoke first, stretching beneath her blanket and blinking at the sun-dappled walls. She could hear the soft scrape of her mother's sandals across stone and the rustling of kindling being arranged in the hearth. The scent of spelt bread and simmering milk drew her into the kitchen where Livia stood, stirring slowly with one hand while crushing dried herbs with the other. She greeted her daughter with a smile and a kiss on the head, motioning for her to set the table with clay bowls and spoons worn smooth with use. Aelia moved without speaking, her steps familiar and her heart content. These quiet morning rituals were as much a part of her as the rising sun. When Septimus entered, his hair still tousled from sleep and his voice a soft rumble, Aelia giggled at the sight of him trying to tuck his tunic properly. He winked at her as he sat, inhaling deeply the comforting scent of breakfast. They ate slowly, savoring the warmth of the porridge, the sweetness of honey, and the delicate tartness of preserved quince. Afterward, Septimus packed a small satchel with a water skin, a simple meal wrapped in cloth, and a carved wooden figure that Aelia had given him, an offering of luck for the day's work. He would be helping rebuild a neighbor's storage shed, a project that brought together several villagers in quiet companionship. Before leaving, he kissed Livia's temple and tousled Aelia's hair, promising to be home before the stars showed their faces. Livia and Aelia stayed behind, tending to their small herb garden first. The lavender was beginning to bloom, sending its calming perfume into the warm air. They moved slowly, pinching dried leaves, tying small bundles of rosemary, and checking on the creeping time that lined the edges of the stone path. As they worked, Livia told stories of her childhood, of the festivals her own mother had taken her to, of the time she danced barefoot on a midsummer's night until her feet ached and her heart sang. Alia listened intently, her fingers buried in the soft earth, the rhythm of her mother's voice like a lullaby made of sunlight and memory. Later, when the midday heat settled across the village, they took shade beneath the olive trees. Livia had laid out a woven mat and brought with her a bowl of figs, a few slices of cheese, and a small cup of watered wine. Alia lay on her back, watching the way the leaves danced above her, the sunlight flickering like gold coins tossed into the wind. Her mother hummed a tune she often sang while weaving, a slow, drifting melody that felt like rocking boats and quiet shores. In that peaceful stillness, Livia shared with Alia a passage from an old scroll, a tale of a bird that flew so high. It kissed the edge of the heavens and returned with stories etched on its feathers. Alia asked what the stories were, and Livia smiled. Each person who hears the tale imagines their own. That's the gift of such stories. They belong to the listener. The quietness of the afternoon wrapped around them like a shawl. Time seemed to slow, folding itself into gentle layers of drowsy comfort. Somewhere in the distance a flute played, perhaps a shepherd tending his flock, the notes floating across the fields like feathers on the breeze. As the sun dipped lower, Livia and Alia prepared dinner, soft lentils with barley and a stew of summer vegetables. The scent filled the villa and drifted out into the garden, calling Septimus home. When he arrived, dusty but smiling, they embraced beneath the doorframe, the air between them full of warmth and quiet gratitude. They dined together as evening deepened, their meal slow and satisfying. Alia recounted the tales she had heard, and asked Septimus what his day had been like. He told her of a sparrow that had perched on the half-finished roof, chirping as if offering advice, and of the way the sun had cast long shadows across the wood like waves upon sand. After they ate, they sat outside once more, watching the stars begin to gather. Alia rested against her father's side, her eyelids heavy. Livia wrapped a shawl around them all and leaned into Septimus, her voice a soft murmur. "It's in these moments that we are most ourselves." He nodded, gazing upward. "The world is big, but here, it feels just right." As Alia drifted into sleep, the sky stretched overhead like a deep, endless ocean. The stars blinked quietly, bearing witness to a day spent in peace. And within the small villa tucked between orchard and field, a family breathed together, slowly, calmly, and full of love. Halfway through our gentle journey, dear listener, remember, if this story brings you peace, helps you rest, or simply warms your spirit, we invite you to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Each gesture helps us bring more quiet stories into the world. The next morning unfurled with the grace of silk, unraveling in the breeze. A pale hush settled across the countryside, the kind of quiet that comes just before the sun warms the stones, and the fields begin to hum with life. Within the villa, the air was still cool, touched by the last traces of the night's chill. Alia awoke to the familiar whisper of cooing doves perched upon the red-tiled roof. She sat up slowly, stretching beneath her linen blanket, her limbs heavy with the pleasant ache of deep, uninterrupted sleep. Down the corridor, she heard her mother's voice, faint and melodic, humming an old lullaby. The song wound its way through the house like a stream, drawing Alia forward. She tiptoed barefoot across the polished stone floor, pausing briefly to run her fingers along the wall's mosaic, a delicate rendering of a fig tree with doves in flight. Each time she saw it, it felt like a greeting from another time, a memory, etched in color and light. In the kitchen, Livia was preparing the morning meal, her movements unhurried and serene. She turned to her daughter with a soft smile, brushing a curl from Alia's cheek. Together they arranged slices of pear on clay plates, added soft cheese wrapped in fig leaves, and poured warm milk from a ceramic jug. They ate with the ease of those who have no need to rush. Outside, the olive trees whispered in the wind, their silver-green leaves fluttering in waves. Later, as the sun climbed higher, Septimus joined them, refreshed and cheerful. He brought with him a handful of wildflowers and a new story. A traveler from another province had passed through the village the day before, and Septimus had shared bread and wine with him near the communal well. The traveler spoke of faraway hills of a town by the sea where the streets glistened with salt, and the air carried the cries of gulls. Aelia listened, her eyes wide, as Septimus described the boats that rocked in the harbor, and the songs of fishermen drifting over the waves. Inspired by the tale, Aelia spent the morning sketching on wax tablets with a stylus, tracing boats and sea creatures and distant stars. Livia watched her daughter with quiet joy, her heart filled with a kind of stillness that only a mother knows, the soft echo of seeing her own childhood reflected in the eyes of another. That afternoon, as the sun settled into a golden slant, the family made their way to the vineyard at the edge of the property. The grapes were nearly ready for harvest, their skins plump and dusky blue. Livia carried a basket for gathering herbs along the path, wild mint, fennel, and chamomile. Aelia ran ahead, her fingers brushing against the tall stalks of grass, her laughter light as wind chimes. Septimus walked with steady steps, his eyes on the sky, where a pair of hawks circled lazily. They sat together in the shade of a fig tree, the breeze gentle against their skin. Livia unwrapped a small bundle of honey cakes and handed one to each of them. The cakes crumbled delicately in their hands, sweet and golden. Aelia leaned against her mother's shoulder, content to simply watch the shadows stretch across the vineyard. "I wonder," Aelia said softly, "if the travelers' boats ever sail here, to our village." "Perhaps they do," Septimus replied. "In stories and dreams, and sometimes that's even better." Livia smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. "We carry the sea inside us, Aelia, even far from its shores." As twilight approached, they walked home slowly, their shadows long and soft on the earth. The villa glowed in the evening light, its stones warm, its windows flickering with the promise of another restful night. Inside, they lit oil lamps and shared a simple meal, barley stew with lentils and a side of olives cured in lemon and herbs. The flames flickered gently, casting dancing reflections upon the walls. After supper, they moved to the courtyard, where the sky was darkening into a soft indigo. Stars blinked above them, each one steady and reassuring. Septimus recited a passage from a scroll he had kept since boyhood, words of ancient wisdom about patience, nature, and the slow turning of time. His voice was calm and deep, flowing like a quiet stream over stones. Aelia nestled into her blanket, her head resting in Livia's lap. Livia whispered a quiet prayer to the household spirits for peace, for health, for joy in the smallest things. The crickets began their chorus, a gentle harmony that lulled the village to sleep. And as the night deepened, with the soft rustle of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl, the family fell into silence, each thought wrapped in comfort. The world outside the villa might be wide and full of stories, but here, in this place of olive groves, warm bread, and quiet voices, was a story all their own, unfolding one peaceful day at a time. Let the calm of their world linger in your thoughts, dear listener. And if their story has soothed your spirit, helped you find rest, or simply brought you warmth, we invite you to share this moment. Like, subscribe, and pass it along to others seeking the gentle embrace of stories that whisper instead of shout. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that was as ancient as the land itself. With each sunrise, the villa stirred softly, not to the sound of alarms or urgency, but to the slow awakening of nature. Doves flapped their wings atop the terracotta roof tiles, cicadas hummed low in the trees, and the scent of fresh herbs drifted through open shutters. Each morning was a quiet unfolding, not a beginning marked by clocks, but a continuation of a story that had no need for haste. Aelia began her day tending to the small garden near the villa's northern wall. There, beneath a pergola heavy with grapevines, rows of herbs thrived: basil, rosemary, thyme, and lavender. She knelt in the soil, her hands gently crumbling the earth between her fingers. The sunlight filtered through the vines above her, speckling her linen tunic with warmth. She hummed softly to herself, an old melody her mother had sung when she was small, one that reminded her of summers long past and the distant laughter of cousins at festival time. Livia watched from the portico, weaving a new basket from willow reeds, her fingers nimble from years of practice. She found comfort in the repetitive motions, the way each strand tucked into place with quiet intention. The air around her was filled with the low murmur of bees drifting between the flowering oleander bushes. Inside, the scent of baking bread grew stronger as the hearth's fire did its work. By mid-morning, Septimus returned from the eastern field, a light sheen of sweat on his brow, but a calm smile on his face. The barley crop was coming along well, he reported, and the younger vines by the stream were showing promise. He removed his sandals and soaked his feet in a basin of cool water placed near the doorway, sighing with contentment as he leaned back and looked out across the hills. "The earth is kind this year," he said. "She gives without rush, just as she always has." Later in the day, the family prepared a midday meal together. Flatbread with olive oil and fresh mint, soft curds seasoned with thyme, a bowl of figs and sliced melon. They ate in the shade of the courtyard fig tree, its gnarled branches as familiar as the sky. The conversation flowed gently, mostly stories, of Livia's youth in the western provinces, of Septimus's first time guiding oxen through a furrow, of a dream Aelia had where she walked along a stream that led to the stars. As the sun crept toward its zenith, they retreated indoors where the stone walls remained cool. Aelia spent this part of the afternoon reclining near the atrium pool, the water reflecting sunlight onto the ceiling in wavering patterns. She opened a scroll of poetry and read aloud in a soft voice, her words floating through the halls like the scent of lavender. Livia listened while threading beads for a necklace, and Septimus dozed lightly in the corner, the gentle sound of his breathing part of the villa's rhythm. Outside, the village around them maintained the same quiet cadence. Shepherds led their flocks through the hills beyond. Potters turned clay with practiced hands, and elders sat beneath the shade of the public fountain, recounting tales from decades gone by. No one hurried. No one watched the sun with worry. It was a world unshaped by haste, where moments stretched out like golden threads, woven carefully into each day's tapestry. In the cooler hours of evening, the family walked the boundary of their land. They paused often, at the old laurel tree where doves nested, at the stone well surrounded by white daisies, at the shrine with its gently flickering oil lamp. They greeted the spirits of place with a bow of respect and a whispered thanks, honoring the land that sustained them with such quiet grace. As stars emerged one by one, Aelia traced constellations in the sky. "That one," she said, pointing, "looks like a lyre." Septimus nodded. "Or a cradle," he replied. "It can be both." Livia wrapped an arm around each of them, her heart full of the quiet joy that comes from stillness and presence. They returned to the villa under a sky woven with starlight. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth. The scent of chamomile tea filled the air, mingled with the last notes of a wind that had blown across the olive groves all day. They sipped, in silence, watching the shadows dance along the walls. That night, as Aelia lay beneath her woven blanket, she listened to the soft chorus of nighttime, the distant call of a nightbird, the rustle of a fig branch, the occasional creak of the wooden shutters in the breeze. The villa seemed to breathe with her, steady and slow. Her thoughts wandered, not in anxious circles but in gentle spirals, each one deeper into sleep. And as her eyes closed, she felt a comfort unlike any other, not of riches or triumphs, but of belonging, of peace rooted in simplicity. In a world where time often rushes, she had found something rare, the beauty of days unmeasured, of moments shared, of lives lived quietly beneath the ever-turning sky. If this story has brought you peace, dear listener, let it stay with you as you close your eyes. And if it has soothed your evening and stilled your thoughts, we gently invite you to subscribe, to like, and to share this gentle journey with others who long for calm. As the moon made its slow arc above the hills, casting a silver glow across, the tiled roofs and vineyard slopes, the villa slept. Yet the world around it did not stop. The cicadas gave way to crickets, and a night breeze rustled through the cypress trees like whispered lullabies. In the starlit courtyard, the small pool reflected the heavens, still and unmoving, as if time itself had paused to rest. Morning began, not with alarms or sudden bursts of energy, but with a slow blooming of golden light across the valley. Alia stirred from her sleep to the scent of warm bread and the distant call of a dove nesting in the stone alcove above her window. She remained still for a moment, savoring the quiet, her breathing matching the rhythmic sounds of life returning gently to the home. Downstairs, Livia was already at work in the kitchen, her movements graceful and calm as she pressed soft goat cheese into woven molds and sliced ripe apricots for the morning table. The fire was low, the embers from the night before glowing with quiet purpose. She sang to herself in a hushed voice, an old folk tune from the northern valleys, barely more than a murmur. Her voice seemed to blend with the crackle of the hearth, the creak of wooden beams and the faint rustle of wind through the laurel branches outside. Septimus emerged shortly after, refreshed from sleep and carrying a bundle of grapevine cuttings. "They need time and water," he said thoughtfully, setting them beside the terrace where they could root in the soft earth. His eyes were calm, his steps sure, no rush, no burden, just the slow, deliberate tending to life. They sat together, on the portico's long bench, warm bread in hand, spreading soft honey over it while gazing out over the mist that curled along the fields. There was no need for plans or schedules, only the land's steady rhythm to follow. As the day wore on, Alia walked the small woodland path behind the vineyard, where the fig trees and olives stood in dappled light. She ran her fingers along the bark of trees older than memory, and stopped at the brook to watch the silver fish dart beneath the surface. With a satchel over her shoulder, she collected bits of wild mint, chamomile, and thyme, each added carefully to her pouch with a note to herself about where it grew and how the soil had felt. She met a shepherd boy on the path back, his goats trailing behind him, bells clinking softly like wind chimes. They exchanged a wave, then paused to speak of the changing clouds, the flowering trees, and the smell of rain in the air. It was a brief conversation, but it lingered like the scent of pine, simple, unhurried, real. Back at the villa, the hours passed in quiet tasks. Livia cleaned the small shrine to Vesta near the entrance, lighting a fresh wick in the oil lamp and placing bay leaves beside the carved stone. Septimus mended a cartwheel with slow strokes of a rasp, his hands as familiar with wood as they were with soil. Alia wrote a letter to her cousin in the north, detailing the bloom of flowers, the size of the grain heads, and the way the stars had looked the night before. As the sun arced overhead and then began its descent, the sky softened into hues of rose and amber. The household gathered once again, this time in the courtyard, where they sat cross-legged on woven mats, eating olives, roasted chickpeas, and sliced pears. The conversation drifted as easily as the smoke from the small fire, ranging from memories to gentle laughter to moments of shared silence. And there, under the open sky, Livia recounted a story from her childhood, of a time she had become lost in the forest, but followed the sound of bees back to safety. Alia listened, wide-eyed, and Septimus added a tale of a rainstorm that once flooded their lower fields, and how he and his brother had built a raft of grapevines to ferry their tools across. Laughter came, not loud or sharp, but warm and rolling, like the hills around them. And when the fire burned low and the stars returned, they remained where they were, comfortable in one another's presence, in the deep familiarity of shared seasons. Later, as Alia prepared for bed, she paused at her window. Below her, the olive trees swayed gently. A torch still flickered near the boundary wall, casting long shadows across the stone. Somewhere in the darkness, a nightjar sang, its call ancient and rhythmic. She whispered a soft prayer, not of want or fear, but of thanks. Thanks for stillness, for belonging, for days without hurry and nights wrapped in peace. To you, dear listener, as you lie in your bed with eyes growing heavy and thoughts growing quiet. May the calm of this ancient Roman evening guide you to rest. May you feel the same safety, the same soft rhythm, the same peace that Aelia felt beneath her woolen blanket. And if this story has brought you comfort, if its slow unfolding has helped you drift closer to sleep, we gently ask you to support our journey. Subscribe for more stories like this tale if it eased your thoughts, and share it with others who seek calm. Sleep well, sleep deeply, and return soon, for there are many more quiet lives and ancient days waiting just beyond the olive grove. The next morning arrived softly, cloaked in a pale golden mist that rolled gently over the vineyard hills. The dew clung to the grape leaves like tiny stars, and the world seemed hushed beneath the first warmth of the sun. Within the villa, everything stirred slowly. There was no rush, no sharp sounds, only the creak of wood, the soft shuffle of sandals, and the distant cooing of doves greeting the new day. Aelia was the first to wake. She remained in bed for a few extra breaths, watching the sunlight creep across her stone windowsill. Her fingers traced the edge of the linen blanket as she listened to the rustle of leaves outside. Then quietly, she rose, washed her face in the cool water left in a clay basin, and dressed in her simple stola, its fabric soft from many washings. She stepped out into the corridor and felt the smooth tiles beneath her bare feet. The air smelled faintly of herbs, bread, and warming earth. She found Livia already in the kitchen, kneading dough with steady hands, her hair tied back with a strip of old linen. "Morning, little owl," Livia said warmly, using the name she had called Aelia since childhood. "The oven's nearly ready, and I've sweetened the dough with dried figs. Would you like to shape the loaves today?" Aelia smiled, nodding, and the two women worked together in comfortable silence. The hearth crackled gently, and flour dust danced in the morning light like tiny specks of snow. Outside, Septimus's footsteps passed slowly by the open door. Was off to check the irrigation channels along the upper fields. The rhythmic clink of his tools was a quiet reassurance, as familiar as a lullaby. After the loaves were baked and cooling on the windowsill, Aelia walked down the villa's stone steps to the orchard, where the apricot trees bloomed with shy pink petals. She carried a small basket and gathered a few fallen fruits, taking her time, lifting each one gently to her nose, inspecting its softness. The bees moved lazily from blossom to blossom, their soft hum harmonizing with the distant sound of a farmer's flute drifting from across the valley. At the edge of the orchard sat an old wooden bench beneath a mulberry tree. It was shaded, cool, and overlooked the river beyond the fields. Aelia sat there for some time, writing in her leather-bound journal. Her notes were quiet observations, the shapes of the clouds, the direction of the wind, the feel of the soil, near the roots. She wasn't recording anything urgent, just the living moments that filled each peaceful day. Back at the villa, Livia had begun preparing a stew of lentils and garlic, adding sprigs of rosemary and thyme from the garden. She moved without hurry, humming again that same quiet tune from her homeland. She took pauses to sip from her clay cup, sometimes stepping out into the courtyard to scatter a few seeds for the doves who gathered there in the afternoons. Septimus returned around midday, wiping sweat from his brow and smiling as he caught the scent of Livia's stew. "It smells like a good year," he said, placing a few sprigs of wild mint on the table. "The fig trees are holding their fruit well. I think we'll have enough to trade and plenty left over." They all sat together beneath the vine-covered pergola for the meal, their simple wooden bowls steaming with warmth. The lentils were tender, the bread soft, the olives brined just enough. Aelia shared the notes from her journal, and Septimus described the way a hawk had circled above the field that morning, casting its wide shadow over the furrows. There was laughter when Livia told of a mouse that had found its way into the storeroom and outsmarted her cleverest trap. They joked softly, their voices low, as if not to disturb the very air around them. The cat, of course, had shown no interest in helping. As the day wore on, Aelia helped Livia press more olive oil in the small stone press. They took turns rotating the beam, pausing to wipe their hands and sip from the jug of watered wine nearby. The sun moved slowly across the sky, and its golden light filtered through the grapevines like liquid silk. A soft breeze stirred the villa, carrying with it the scent of laurel and fresh hay. Later, they rested. Septimus reclined in the shade with a scroll in hand, reading lines of rustic poetry that made him chuckle quietly now and then. Aelia lay nearby with her head resting on a folded cloak, eyes half closed, listening to the bees and the gentle tap of olives falling into a basket as Livia sorted them one by one. It was in this hush, as the shadows lengthened and the light took on a softer hue, that Aelia spoke of dreams. "I had one last night," she said gently, "that I was walking through a temple made of trees. Every leaf whispered something, though I couldn't understand the words. I felt safe, as though I had walked into something older than time." Livia nodded slowly. "Sometimes the trees remember," she said simply, as if that explained everything. Septimus looked up from his scroll and added, "Then listen. If they have something to say, it's worth hearing." The three sat in that quiet moment, surrounded by the hum of life, the vineyard, the orchard, the fields, all breathing together in harmony. And to you, dear listener, perhaps you too are beginning to drift, like a leaf on a gentle stream. Let this story carry you further, deeper into peace, as the warm rhythm of ancient days moves slowly through your thoughts. And as always, if this tale soothes your heart and stills your mind, we invite you gently to support us. Subscribe, like, and share this story with others seeking rest and serenity. Your kindness helps these stories continue. Now sleep, listener, and dream of temples made of trees, of fig-sweet mornings and olive-pressed evenings. We shall return with more. As twilight settled like a soft blanket over the hills, the villa embraced the hush of evening. The sky turned from pale gold to a gentle lavender, and the air carried with it the scent of cooling earth and distant wood smoke. Birds gave their final calls before roosting, and the last bees returned slowly to their hives, their buzzing reduced to a mere whisper. In the central courtyard, an oil lamp flickered to life, casting a delicate amber glow across the stone floor. Livia placed the final olives into their storage jars, sealing each one with a careful layer of oil and wax. Her hands moved with the practiced grace of years, each action deliberate, each moment respected. She hummed quietly, barely above a whisper, as she wiped the stone countertop clean with a damp cloth. The kitchen now smelled of thyme, pressed olives, and baked earth. Aelia, meanwhile, had wandered toward the edge of the property, where the tall cypress trees cast long, slender shadows over a small spring-fed pond. It was a quiet place she often visited at day's end, a place where frogs sang their slow, sleepy songs, and the reeds swayed like dancers in a lullaby. She knelt near the edge, letting her fingers dip into the cool water, watching the ripples expand outward in perfect circles. She gathered her thoughts slowly, watching as the reflection of the first evening stars began to shimmer on the surface. Not far behind her, Septimus appeared with a small clay jug. "I thought you might want a little honey water," he said in that same soft, low voice of his. "I mixed in a bit of lemon balm from the garden." Aelia took the cup with a grateful nod and sipped slowly. The warm sweetness settled gently in her chest. Together they sat in peaceful silence, watching as a pair of owls emerged from the trees and floated silently across the sky, wings outstretched, like parchment gliding through the air. As the moon rose, casting a silver hue over the olive trees and vineyards, the three returned to the villa. The stone walls now radiated a gentle warmth from the sun they'd absorbed all day. Inside, they lit a few more lamps, their glow soft and welcoming. The flickering light reflected off the polished ceramic bowls stacked on the shelf, and shadows danced like slow-moving spirits along the ceiling beams. They shared a final evening meal, a bowl of creamy barley porridge sweetened with figs and a hint of cinnamon. The texture was smooth, the flavor gentle. As they ate, they spoke not of work or plans, but of memories. Livia told of a summer when fireflies had filled the orchard like tiny lanterns, and Aelia remembered the time they had found a litter of fox pups near the vineyard wall. Septimus smiled at the recollection of how they'd built a little fence to keep them safe until their mother returned. Later, as the villa quieted and the stars multiplied in the sky, Aelia sat by the open window of her room. She let the soft breeze lift the strands of her hair, listening to the nighttime hum of insects, the rustle of ivy against stone, and the low hoot of a distant owl. She opened her journal once more, and in her neat, deliberate script, she wrote, "There is a rhythm here, a breathing to the land. Each day folds into the next with such softness that I do not notice where one ends and the next begins. I feel not like I am living in history, but that history lives gently within me." She closed the book and placed it beside her on the wooden table. Then, with a deep, peaceful breath, she curled beneath her linen blanket, the soft rustle of it echoing like a lullaby through the room. Outside, the wind whispered through the grapevines. Everything was at rest. And you, dear listener, as you lie back and let your eyes drift closed, may you too feel that rhythm, the slow, comforting heartbeat of a world not forgotten but simply quieted. Let the warmth of the hearth, the softness of the soil, and the calm of the ancient air fill your mind with comfort. May your dreams carry you gently through olive groves and moonlit fields, where every moment is slow, soft, and safe. And if this story has brought you peace, we invite you once again to support us. Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it with those who need rest. Your support brings these stories to life and helps them travel to others who long for calm. Sleep now, friend. The villa sleeps with you. The world is still, and all is well. Morning crept slowly over the horizon, not with urgency, but with the gentle unfolding of golden light across the hills. A warm, amber hue spilled over the tiled rooftops and wove through the vines that wrapped themselves tenderly around the villa's walls. Dew clung to every blade of grass and every leaf, shimmering like tiny glass pearls. The quiet stillness was only broken by the low murmur of birds beginning their day with soft songs, not rushed, not loud, but murmurs of waking joy. Inside, the sea. Warmth of the rising sun gently touched Aelia's sleeping face. Her breathing was even, her hands resting calmly atop the linen coverlet, and the slight flutter of her lashes the only sign of stirring. Slowly, the light coaxed her from the calm embrace of sleep. She opened her eyes to the filtered light dancing through the sheer curtains and smiled softly, as though greeting an old friend. She rose slowly, not out of duty but out of gratitude for another simple, peaceful day ahead. Pulling a shawl gently over her shoulders, she padded barefoot through the hallway, her steps making the softest sounds against the terracotta tiles. She moved toward the open courtyard where the first light fell strongest. And there, she stood, for a long moment, letting the sun wash over her skin like warm water. In the kitchen, Livia had already begun the quiet rituals of the morning. A pot of barley was simmering gently on the stove, releasing a light, nutty fragrance that mingled with the earthy aroma of fresh thyme and marjoram. She turned with a smile as Aelia entered. Without words, she ladled warm porridge into a ceramic bowl and handed it to her gently, their hands meeting in a brief but tender moment. Septimus appeared not long after, his face weathered with sun and time, yet peaceful and unhurried. He carried with him a small basket of fresh eggs, collected just moments before. Their shells were soft-toned and warm to the touch, some still speckled with dust and straw. The three of them sat at the stone table in the shaded part of the courtyard, sharing their breakfast beneath the slow-swaying branches of a nearby fig tree. They spoke softly of the dreams they'd had, images of starlit rivers, gentle horses, and vines that whispered. After the meal, the day began to unfold with the same unhurried rhythm that had always been their way. Aelia made her way to the garden, her basket swaying at her side. The soil was still cool from the night, and she took a moment to kneel down, placing her palm gently against it, as if greeting an old and trusted friend. Around her, the garden came alive, not in sudden bursts but in the slow, persistent way that nature prefers. The bees were at work again, tracing their loops from flower to flower, and the vines, heavy with early grapes, swayed under the whisper of the breeze. She picked herbs with practiced care, sprigs of mint, clusters of lavender, long stems of rosemary. Each plant seemed to offer itself willingly, as though it too understood the peace of this place. In the far distance, the sound of a shepherd's flute floated in, so faint it could have been a memory, but it lingered, soft and bright like a ribbon of sound through the trees. In the villa, time was not measured by clocks, but by the sun's slow arc and the shifting of light across the courtyard floor. Midday passed with quiet labor. Septimus tended to the tools, cleaning and oiling them not for necessity but for respect. His hands moved slowly, the wooden handles smooth beneath his fingers. Livia prepared a meal of lentils and flatbread, letting the soft scent of cumin and coriander fill the air like incense. As they ate together once again, Aelia shared a passage she had written in her journal earlier in the morning. Her voice was soft, but each word was shaped with care. This villa breathes with us. The walls hold stories we do not know, but they speak in the rustle of leaves, in the wind passing over the fields. I feel no urgency here, only the gentle patience of the earth. The words seemed to settle around them like a comforting blanket. Septimus nodded, his eyes glinting with approval. The land remembers, he said, and it is kind to those who listen. The afternoon invited rest. In the shade of the cypress trees, they each found a place to lie down, a woven mat beneath their backs, the breeze combing through their hair. Above, clouds passed like ancient ships over a sea of blue, and birds glided from branch to branch, without a sound. The world in that moment felt timeless. The warm hum of insects was like a lullaby, the distant clatter of an ox cart on the Roman road a mere echo. And as the light shifted again, this time toward evening, they rose slowly, refreshed not by sleep alone but by the stillness itself. In the distance, the faint call of the evening bell from a neighboring estate could just barely be heard, carried by the wind like a prayer. It was time to gather for supper, to light the lamps once more, and to let the story of another simple day settle into memory. We'll continue shortly, flowing seamlessly into the next portion of this calm, sleep-inducing journey through life, in an ancient Roman villa. As the sun began its descent behind the distant hills, the golden light of late afternoon wrapped the villa in a soft, honey-colored glow. The leaves of the olive trees shimmered like tiny mirrors, their silvery undersides catching the last rays of the day. Aelia moved quietly through the colonnade, her fingertips trailing gently across the smooth, cool stone of each pillar. There was no rush, only the rhythmic cadence of her steps and the tranquil stillness of the approaching evening. In the central courtyard, Septimus had begun the familiar task of lighting the oil lamps. Their small flames flickered to life one by one, casting elongated shadows that danced across the ground like ancient spirits come to rest. The scent of the lamps, olive oil warmed by fire, blended with the aroma of lavender and basil still clinging to Aelia's hands. She watched as the villa slowly transformed under the touch of dusk, every detail softening, every corner becoming cloaked in calm. Livia was preparing supper in the kitchen with practiced ease. The hearth crackled softly, its warmth spreading through the villa like a gentle sigh. A clay pot bubbled slowly with a stew of lentils, leeks, and a hint of crushed bay leaf, sending steam curling into the air. Flatbreads baked on hot stones, filling the space with the comforting scent of wheat and fire. She hummed a quiet melody, something passed down from her mother, perhaps even from her mother's mother, something timeless. Soon, the table beneath the pergola was set. Ceramic bowls, simple and beautiful, gleamed in the lamplight. Aelia brought a small dish of pickled olives she had prepared the week before, the brine capturing the sunlight in pale glints. Septimus laid down a small loaf of dark bread, still, warm from the oven, and a jug of red wine pressed from grapes they'd harvested together last autumn. As they sat to eat, there was no need for conversation. The clink of pottery, the crack of bread being broken, the soft sighs of satisfaction. These were enough. Around them, the evening unfolded slowly, wrapping the villa in a cocoon of calm. Somewhere beyond the walls, an owl called, its hoot low and rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the quiet. After the meal, they remained seated for a while longer. Alia leaned back in her chair, gazing upward at the stars beginning to reveal themselves in the indigo sky. One by one, constellations appeared: Orion, Cassiopeia, and the Great Bear, all ancient and unchanging, watching over them with the serenity of eternity. Septimus began to tell a story, his voice low and measured, his words drifting like the smoke from the lamp wicks. He spoke of the early days of the villa, when it was little more than stone and timber, and of how they had built it together, slowly, with love and patience. He recalled the planting of the first olive tree, and how they had waited years before it bore fruit. He spoke of the land, the way it gave and received, the way it forgave. Alia listened with closed eyes, not asleep but suspended in that delicate space between waking and dreaming. Livia sat beside her, her head resting lightly on her hand, a small smile touching her lips. The past and present seemed to fold into each other in that moment, the story threading through time like the winding path of the river below their fields. As the night deepened, they bid one another quiet good nights. Alia returned to her room, where the linen sheets were cool and the window open to the whispering wind. She lay back, her body sinking into the softness, her eyes tracing the shadows of the vine leaves outside. Before sleep fully claimed her, she heard the soft rustle of Livia's footsteps passing her door, the gentle creak of Septimus's chair as he settled near the hearth once more. The villa was still awake in its own way, alive with breath, with memory, with peace. Outside, the moon rose higher, casting a silver path across the rooftops and into the quiet courtyard, and the night embraced the villa completely, a velvet hush that held every stone, every branch, every soul within it. The story continues with the same slow grace, unfolding like petals in the morning light. Let me guide you gently through the next part soon, where time moves with the rhythm of the stars, and the heart finds its place in the calm of ancient days. The soft hush of night lingered into the early hours, when the sky was still dark, but not without light, tinged faintly in hues of blue and lavender, the earliest hints of dawn pressing against the edges of the horizon. The world was not yet awake, but in the villa the quiet rhythm of life stirred with gentleness. Alia awoke slowly, her senses wrapped in the lingering warmth of dreams. Her room, cool and still, smelled faintly of rosemary and the linen of clean bedsheets. Outside, the cicadas had grown quiet, replaced by the rare, low call of a dove in the olive grove. She didn't rise immediately, choosing instead to lie still for a while, watching the soft movement of shadows on the wall, listening to the house breathe around her. Eventually, she rose and dressed with simple grace, wrapping herself in a tunic of woven wool the color of pale earth. Her feet found her sandals with familiar ease, and as she stepped out into the courtyard, the cool stone beneath her soles welcomed her. The air was sweet with the scent of moist soil and the faint perfume of night-blooming flowers now retreating. With the darkness, Septimus was already outside, tending the hearth fire that had dwindled during the night. He moved slowly, as he always did in the early hours, methodically stacking kindling, coaxing life into the coals, blowing softly until the first flames flickered back into being. The warmth was a comfort, though the morning was not cold. More symbolic than necessary, he greeted Alia with a nod and a smile, saying nothing, but offering her a small clay cup of warm, honeyed barley drink. Together, they sat beneath the wooden beams of the portico, watching the sky brighten. The stars, one by one, faded away, replaced by the soft bands of daylight painting the hills in distant blushes. Below, in the fields, a light mist hovered over the wheat like a veil, and from beyond the stone walls came the quiet bleating of sheep, waking to the touch of morning. Soon, Livia joined them, her hair loosely braided, her arms carrying a small basket of figs and fresh cheese. She yawned lightly, covering her mouth with the back of her hand, then sat beside them, placing the basket between them. The three shared a quiet meal, their voices kept low in reverence for the fragile beauty of dawn. After breakfast, the work of the day began, but never rushed, never jarring. Dualia moved to the herb garden, her fingers deft and sure as she snipped sprigs of mint and thyme, rosemary and dill. The herbs were gathered not just for flavor, but for their healing properties, for the scents they gave the home, for the quiet sense of purpose they brought. She placed each one carefully into a woven basket, breathing in the mingled aroma as if gathering peace itself. Septimus carried a clay jug to the well, drawing up the fresh, cold water that had sat deep in the earth. Overnight, he poured it into cisterns and bowls for the animals, watching as the goats approached with soft bleats and eager tongues. One of the young ones nudged his hand, and he smiled, scratching behind its ear, murmuring something only it could understand. Livia had begun kneading dough by the window, her hands moving in slow, circular motions, pressing and folding as the morning light crept across the floor toward her feet. The scent of yeast and flour filled the kitchen like a promise, and beside her, a pot of honey sat warming in the sun. As the morning progressed, the villa grew more alive, but never loud. The birds took up their songs in the branches above, and a gentle breeze rustled the fig leaves. Bees visited the blossoms with quiet diligence, their wings a soft hum in the otherwise serene world. Even the distant sound of a cartwheel on a village path did not disturb the calm. Rather, it added to it, another rhythm in the long, slow song of rural life. Midday arrived not as a peak, but as a soft crest. The sun stood high, its light dappled through the pergola vines. The villa, warm now, retreated into its stone-cool interiors. Aelia had returned from gathering, her basket full and her shoulders lightly dusted with pollen. Septimus rested briefly under the shade of the olive trees, his hat pulled low, a fig in one hand. Livia had finished the baking, the loaves now cooling on a wooden rack as she sat nearby, embroidering a linen cloth with pale, looping threads. It was at this point in the day, a pause in the middle of movement, that they often found the best peace. Aelia would sit near the fountain in the courtyard, the water flowing gently, its rhythm both soothing and timeless. She would often bring a scroll not to study, but to trace her eyes over familiar lines, stories of ancestors, of myth, of philosophy, words that didn't demand understanding, only presence. And it is here, in this stillness, that we remind our listeners to take a moment. If you've enjoyed this journey into the soft corners of ancient life, if the rhythms and voices of the past have brought you comfort and calm, we kindly invite you to subscribe, like, and share our stories. Your support helps us continue to bring you gentle, historical narratives designed to soothe your nights and ease your mind. Now, as the light begins to soften once again, and afternoon leans gently toward evening, let us continue, deeper into the quiet harmony of Roman life, where every hour brings its own beauty, and every breath is a reminder of peace. The afternoon light drifted down like gauze, golden and warm, casting soft shadows on the tiled floor of the villa. Time seemed to slow even more during these hours. It was not the sluggishness of fatigue, but rather the deliberate pace of a world that refused to rush. The sun, now beginning its long descent, gave everything a glow that blurred the lines between reality and dream. Aelia returned to the herb room, where she carefully tied the bundles she had gathered earlier with slender twine. The fragrance was heady, lavender and sage, sweet marjoram and crisp mint, blending into a scent that clung gently to the air like memory. She hung the herbs from wooden beams to dry, their stalks upside down, leaves whispering faintly with each movement. It was a small act, a daily one, but one she cherished. These herbs would flavor their meals, ease their colds, and perfume their linens. In their simplicity, they held life together. Outside, Septimus was polishing the wooden handles of his tools, each one a familiar extension of his hand. The spade he'd carved himself years ago, smoothed by time and soil. The pruning knife, its blade lovingly sharpened. His motions were patient, his eyes focused, but his mind calm. These tasks, so ordinary, were never truly repetitive. Each stroke of oil, each pull of cloth, was part of a ritual that gave meaning to the day. Livia had finished her embroidery, and now prepared small dishes for the evening meal. Slices of soft cheese wrapped in fig leaves, olives marinated in oil and herbs, fresh bread lightly brushed with honey. The kitchen was filled with a quiet hum, the faint bubble of simmering broth, the clink of pottery, the occasional low note of a song she hummed beneath her breath. Her movements were graceful, born of experience, and the rhythm of her work was a song unto itself. As the heat of the day lifted, a gentle breeze wandered in from the sea beyond the hills. It brought with it the scent of salt and wild thyme, and made the olive trees whisper softly to each other. The leaves shimmered in the light, silver green, casting flickering patterns on the dusty ground. Septimus leaned back beneath one of these trees, resting against its sturdy trunk, eyes half-lidded as he watched a hawk circle high above in the cloudless sky. Nearby, Alia had taken to sketching in the margins of her scroll, a habit she'd picked up in childhood. She drew vines and birds, amphorae and rooftops, idle details from her surroundings that brought her quiet joy. Sometimes she would pause, staring into space for long stretches, not in idleness, but in reflection. There was no urgency, no pressing worry. The present moment was enough. Children's laughter rang out faintly from a neighboring villa, distant and unobtrusive. A shepherd's dog barked once in the far fields, then silence returned, soft and welcoming. In the stillness, it was easy to forget the passage of time, to feel suspended in a world both ancient and eternal. By late afternoon, the animals returned from their shaded resting spots to graze again in the lower pasture. The goats clambered over the stone terraces, their bells tinkling lightly. The sheep moved more slowly, like drifting clouds, content in their search for tender grass. Septimus stood at the gate, leaning slightly on his staff, watching them with a gentle eye. He did not count them. He knew them all. Each one had its place, its pattern, its story. Inside the villa, the light deepened. The sun's angle turned everything to amber. Shadows stretched, and the corners of rooms darkened into pools of calm. Alia lit the small oil lamps along the wall, their golden flames flickering softly. The warmth of the fire echoed in the terracotta tiles, and the walls themselves seemed to glow from within. Dinner was taken slowly, as it always was. They sat around the low table in the triclinium, reclining on cushions, savoring each bite. The flavors were simple but rich. Roasted vegetables from the garden, grains softened in broth, cheese and herbs and ripe fruit. Conversation flowed in a gentle stream, touching on memories, tasks, thoughts, and stories. No one hurried. The end of the day was something to be absorbed, not avoided. After the meal, they moved once again to the courtyard, where the stars were beginning to show themselves in the deepening twilight. The first to appear was always the same, a pale light over the eastern ridge, and its presence marked the true end of the workday. The air was cooler now, touched with the faint scent of night flowers and earth. Crickets resumed their song in the distance. Alia brought out her lyre, and with slow, deliberate fingers she played soft notes that rose into the air like drifting smoke. The melody was ancient, perhaps even forgotten by those beyond the villa walls, but here it lived on, a lullaby to the evening. Livia sang with her, her voice low and soothing, weaving gently through the strings. Septimus closed his eyes and leaned back, his chest rising and falling in rhythm with the music. When at last the night was fully upon them, and the stars numbered beyond counting, they rose one by one to prepare for rest. Alia placed her lyre aside, covered in soft cloth. Livia extinguished the last of the oil lamps, and Septimus checked the gate once more, as he always did. Routine, yes, but not without purpose. It was their way of closing the day, of folding it gently into memory. The bedrooms were cool and dark. Outside, an owl hooted softly from an olive branch. Inside, the villa seemed to sigh, settling into its stillness once more. The world turned slowly outside, but here, within these walls, time was a gentle river, steady, slow, and always flowing toward peace. As you lie down to sleep tonight, perhaps you can carry with you the quiet rhythms of this day in ancient Rome. The whispering leaves, the laughter in the distance, the warmth of shared meals, the music that softened the stars. Let these images cradle your mind, soothing and calm, a place of rest you can return to again and again. And if this story brought you peace, if it helped you find rest or simply made your evening softer, we would be honored if you would subscribe, like, and share. Each gesture helps us bring more stories like this to those who need them. Good night, traveler in time. Sleep well, and may the stars watch gently over your dreams.